They say that if you stand alone in front of the Colosseum on a quiet night, you can hear the echo of thousands of voices. Some scream, others beg. All of them come from the past. For centuries, it was the stage of an empire's greatness, and also of its darkness. Here, triumphs were celebrated with blood. Death was applauded. Power was worshipped like a god. And yet today, half of the Colosseum is gone. It wasn't an earthquake. It wasn't the passing of time. It was something more cruel, more human. Rome destroyed it. Stone by stone. Legally. With permission. Without shame. But why? How can a civilization erase its own most imposing symbol? This is the story of a monument that was a spectacle, a prison, a cemetery, a factory, a bandit's refuge, and then, miraculously, sacred. A story of betrayal of memory. Of myths that became truth. Of truths no one wanted to tell. Today, you're going to learn what almost no one dares to say about the Colosseum. You're going to understand why the other half disappeared. And maybe, you'll discover that we, too, live in our own Colosseums. We just don't always see them. Stay. Because what you're about to discover, will change the way you look at history. And maybe, the way you look at yourself. It was the year 70 AD. Rome had just emerged from one of its bloodiest battles, the Jewish War. The Temple of Jerusalem had fallen. The spoils were immeasurable. And one man, with a brilliant political vision, decided that this treasure should serve more than just to fill the empire's coffers. It should erect a monument to Rome's power. A symbol of the glory of its people. That man was Vespasian, and the Colosseum would be his boldest statement. What many don't know is that the construction of this amphitheater, the largest the world had ever seen, didn't begin as a simple idea for entertainment. No. The Colosseum was, above all, an act of propaganda. Vespasian had been elected emperor in the midst of a Rome torn apart by civil wars. He needed more than a strong army. He needed a symbol of stability, of the restoration of order, and above all, a symbol of absolute power. And nothing is more powerful than using the opulence of war booty to raise a monument over the ruins of your predecessor. Vespasian didn't just destroy Nero's golden palace, the Domus Aurea. He erased it from public memory and replaced it with the Colosseum. A structure meant to last centuries and to erase the trace of the emperor who once declared himself a god. Every brick of that construction was paid for with Jewish blood. Literally. Rome took the gold, the silver, the jewels, and the wealth from the looted temples of Jerusalem, and with that same money, the Colosseum began to rise. But beyond materials, there was something even more important that Vespasian needed. He needed a captive people. He needed to ensure that Romans never forgot who was in charge. The monumental scale of the Colosseum was a subtle threat, a reminder that Rome, though once conquered in the distant past, would never submit. The Colosseum was Rome telling the world, "We are the masters of time." Did you know that the Jewish prisoners of war weren't just forced to serve as labor? Some historians claim they were made to watch, from the very foundations of the Colosseum, the symbol of their defeat, every time the arena filled with gladiators, beasts, and the condemned. But what truly marked the beginning of the Colosseum's story wasn't just its construction, it was the event that gave it life. The inauguration. 100 days of spectacles. 100 days in which 9,000 animals were slaughtered in the arena. And not just animals. Thousands of gladiators, many of them prisoners of war, had to fight to the death for the entertainment of the masses. During those first days, Rome didn't just celebrate power, it imposed it. The first crowds to fill the Colosseum seats were not just spectators. They were accomplices. An entire generation of Romans grew up seeing brutality as part of the natural cycle of life. The Colosseum was not just a place for entertainment. It was a machine for shaping consciousness. Through its violence, Rome maintained its dominance, not just over people, but over the very concept of empire. Vespasian understood something few politicians ever do. The Colosseum wasn't just a theater. It was the perfect stage for lessons on power, death, suffering, and control. And the fact that it stood on the site of a statue of Nero, the emperor who believed himself a god, gave it an even more powerful message. Now we are the gods of Rome. Imagine this, the Colosseum is full. The crowd is on the edge of their seats, shouting. The floor, covered in a layer of sand, is ready to receive what, for many Romans, would be the greatest spectacle of their lives. But this is no ordinary show. This is Gladiator, the combat between life and death, human flesh versus beast. And it wasn't just gladiators fighting each other. In the Colosseum, anything was possible: wild animal slaughters, staged hunts, even public executions. The Colosseum was much more than a combat arena. It was a machine for generating emotion, creating adrenaline, driving crowds mad. Here, in every fight, in every death, Rome displayed not just its military power, but its power over the psychology of the masses. Imagine the scene: the gladiators, condemned to fight to the death, enter the Colosseum naked. They are not only unarmed, they are humiliated. In front of thousands of eyes, the tension builds. Will they survive or be devoured by the beasts? And the beasts, creatures from Africa, brought from rhinoceroses to elephants, emerged from the underground traps of the hypogeum, ready to kill. But this was not just a spectacle of physical violence. It was a spectacle of psychological control. The crowd didn't just watch the fighters battle, they felt death, became emotionally involved in the fate of those men and animals. Each death was not just a sentence, but a celebration, a ritual of power, a demonstration of what Rome could do to those who defied its greatness. And this is where the most chilling details come in. The gladiators weren't just prisoners of war. Some were slaves, others were men fighting for their freedom. But their origin didn't matter. They were all there to serve one purpose: to entertain a society that fed on blood. During the inauguration of the Colosseum, 9,000 animals were slaughtered in the arena, an almost unbelievable number. But Rome wasn't just killing animals. It was sending a clear message: the empire had absolute control over life and death. The gladiators and beasts weren't just actors in a violent theater, they were pieces on a board, used to reaffirm Rome's greatness, its power over nature, over human life, over everything that didn't belong to the empire. But it wasn't just gladiators fighting each other. There were also naumachii, staged naval battles. The Colosseum was flooded, and gladiators fought on floating ships. This type of spectacle was one of the greatest engineering feats of the time, filling an arena with water to simulate naval combat, Roman entertainment at its peak. What fascinated Romans wasn't just the blood spilled, but the sheer scale of these events. At times, the Colosseum seemed like a machine generating horror and fascination on a massive scale. In the year 107, Emperor Trajan organized a 123-day-long festival to celebrate his victory over the Dacians, featuring over 10,000 gladiators and 11,000 animals. All for the crowd's pleasure, feeding on those primal emotions, on the bread and circuses that kept the Roman people distracted as the city marched toward the abyss. Gladiators became celebrities, adored by the people. Roman women would buy vials containing the sweat of their favorite gladiators as objects of desire, believed to have magical or even aphrodisiac properties. And somehow, even the gladiators, those slaves or condemned men, felt like stars of the show. But in the end, all of this was part of a much bigger game. The Colosseum was a stage, but its spectators weren't just there to witness blood and death. They were there to be dominated, to be controlled. Violence became a kind of collective ritual that united the Roman people under one cause: their love for the power of the empire. The Colosseum, once the beating heart of Rome, began to crumble long before the empire fell. It wasn't just the forces of nature that devastated it, it was negligence, abandonment, and in many cases, organized looting that stripped the Colosseum of its very identity. Imagine this: centuries have passed since the last gladiators walked its sands. The Roman Empire is no longer what it once was. Rome begins to suffer the wear of centuries. People, tired of the opulence and brutality of their ancestors, no longer care about the old rituals. The arena is left empty. The buildings around the Colosseum begin to fall, like a city in decline. But that didn't mean the Colosseum was no longer useful. On the contrary, it became a quarry. After the earthquakes that shook Rome, especially the devastating one in 217, the ruins of the Colosseum were legally looted, and the city began to use its stones as building material. Over the centuries, the marble from the Colosseum's facade was removed, burned, and repurposed to build churches, palaces, and hospitals. Nothing went to waste. Rome fed on its own monuments. For years, the Colosseum turned into a cemetery. The poorest families of Rome began burying their dead among the ruins, seeking rest in what had once been a symbol of greatness and power. The empire had fallen, but the ruins still served as refuge for those who lived in the shadow of what had once been the most powerful city in the world. But the looting didn't stop there. Pope Alexander VI, with his eyes on the future rather than the past, leased the Colosseum as a quarry. The ruins became a constant source of stone blocks, precious materials, and iron to fuel the growth of a Rome that no longer needed gladiators to entertain its people. It only saw value in what could be salvaged. Neglect and time did their work. As Rome entered the Middle Ages, the Colosseum went from an imposing monument to a decaying structure, overrun with weeds, invasive vegetation, and dark tunnels that only the bold dared to explore. The centuries left it in ruins, and humanity had forgotten it. By the end of the 6th century, the Colosseum was just an improvised fortress, occupied by the Frangipani and Annibaldi families, two powerful Roman dynasties that turned it into a military refuge. What was once a symbol of spectacle and blood now sheltered bandits and families fighting for control of the city. By the 14th century, Rome had sunk into insecurity and abandonment. The church, now the city's most powerful institution, was forced to halt its legacy of wealth and imposition. Instead, the Colosseum became the stage for less glorious warriors, those who fought not for honor, but to survive in the shadows of a world that no longer cared for what imperial Rome once was. The story of the Colosseum doesn't end with the fall of the Roman Empire. No, its symbolism goes far beyond. In the 4th century, Christianity began to spread, and with it, a new way of seeing the world. The violence that once fueled the Colosseum became a symbol of divine sacrifice. But how did this transformation happen? How did the very place that witnessed the death of thousands of gladiators and prisoners of war come to be seen by many as sacred? The answer lies in the Christian tradition that grew around this imposing monument. A legend began to take shape. The Colosseum was the scene of the martyrdom of the early Christians. And although there's no historical evidence confirming that Christian martyrs actually died there, this idea became deeply rooted in the collective consciousness of Rome and the Christian world. Pope Benedict XIV was one of the main promoters of this myth. In 1749, during his papacy, he declared that the Colosseum should be considered a site of Christian sacrifice, since, according to his version of events, the first Christian martyrs met their end in the arena of this monument. Benedict XIV consecrated the Colosseum to the Passion of Christ, celebrating the blood shed by Christian martyrs. But historical truth tells a different story. There is no solid evidence that Christians were martyred in the Colosseum. The Circus Maximus, another grand venue for public spectacles in Rome, is a more likely site for the executions of early Christians. However, the power of popular tradition and the desire to give a Christian meaning to the ruins of the empire led the Colosseum to be adopted as a symbol of Christian suffering. And since Rome is the cradle of Christianity, turning the Colosseum into a sacred site became a way to redeem the ancient symbolism of violence. Rome, the city of emperors, now saw in the Colosseum not just a relic of its brutal past, but a place where the blood of innocents was shed out of love for Christ. Over the centuries, the Colosseum became a site of religious pilgrimage. Many Christians came to pray there, to honor the memory of the martyrs who, according to tradition, suffered for their faith. The place shifted from being a symbol of death and torture to a symbol of redemption and divine sacrifice. But the historical reality is less romantic. The Colosseum was not originally a Christian sanctuary, but a place where pain, death, and humiliation were celebrated as mass entertainment. Only centuries later, when society and the church reinterpreted its symbolism, did it become what it is today, a sacred site for many, but also a reminder of how stories, legends, and reinterpretations can transform a place of violence into one of devotion. After centuries of looting, earthquakes, and neglect, the Colosseum, this stone colossus that once represented Rome's absolute power, began to fade into the background of history. Rome was no longer the capital of the world, and the grandeur of the Colosseum remained only in the writings of ancient historians and in the minds of curious tourists. But something started to change. Over the 19th and 20th centuries, the Colosseum was rediscovered, not just as a ruin, but as a symbol of something much greater, a symbol of human resilience, our ability to survive, adapt, and redeem ourselves. In 1749, Pope Benedict XIV consecrated the Colosseum as a sacred place, turning it into a pilgrimage site. But it was in the 19th century that global awareness began to awaken to the importance of this monument. During the restoration of the Colosseum, between 1807 and 1827, key interventions were carried out to prevent the monument from completely collapsing. Thanks to these efforts, the Colosseum began to be seen not just as a ruin of the past, but as a witness to humanity, a vital piece of the world's cultural legacy. Throughout the 20th century, the Colosseum went from a local emblem to an international symbol. As nations around the world struggled to find their identity, Rome and the Colosseum came to represent a universal symbol of struggle and resistance. In 1964, Pope John Paul II made a symbolic gesture by dedicating the Colosseum to Christian martyrs, giving its history a new religious and human meaning. But this was not the only message the Colosseum had for the world. With the international campaign against the death penalty, the Colosseum was transformed into a symbol of hope, not just for Italy, but for the entire world. It was lit up in gold in 2012 to celebrate the abolition of the death penalty in Connecticut. Since then, every time there's a human rights victory, the Colosseum shines as a reminder of the fight for life and freedom. Today, the Colosseum is one of the most visited monuments in the world, receiving millions of tourists each year. It has become a cathedral of global tourism, and although it remains a reminder of Roman brutality, it is also a symbol of our capacity to learn from past mistakes and fight for a fairer future. What was once an arena of death has now become a place of reflection, learning, and unity among cultures. Because, just like Rome at its peak, the Colosseum has been able to be reborn, not just as a historical site, but as a symbol of humanity's constant struggle for peace, justice, and human rights. The story of the Colosseum is the story of Rome itself, a civilization that rose from nothing to achieve greatness, but ultimately collapsed under the weight of its own ambition, violence, and neglect. The Colosseum, a monument that witnessed glory, power, and death, has become a symbol of the passage of time. Today, we look into its ruins and ask ourselves, what remains of us when we fall? Great empires, like the Colosseum, don't fall overnight. Decay is a slow process, and the symbols of power we build throughout history can crumble in unexpected ways. The question is, what are we building today that may become ruins tomorrow? In this journey of destruction and redemption, the Colosseum has survived centuries of neglect, looting, and restoration. And like us, it has reinvented itself. And we? What legacies are we leaving behind? Will they be symbols of struggle, justice, of what truly matters? Or will we be remembered for our thirst for power, violence, and control? Today, the Colosseum is more than a monument. It is a reminder of what we are capable of creating and destroying. It invites us to reflect on our own history and the future we are building. Because, like the Colosseum, we all face the passage of time, forgetfulness, transformation. And only we can decide whether our ruins will be a source of pride, or a warning. Let us know in the comments what you think about the Colosseum. Is it a symbol of what we were, or of what we can become? What legacy are we leaving behind today? And if this story surprised you, share this video with your friends so they too can discover the hidden power behind the ruins of Rome.